I've recently been asked a very good question, and that is, what is the real Kriya Yoga? And I understand why this question is being asked, and I've actually been asked it many times, which is what inspired me to finally put together this little talk. Well, first of all, let's consider, why do people ask this question? What is the real Kriya Yoga? Well, more than likely, they've read Autobiography of a Yogi or heard of Paramahansa Yogananda or some of the other teachers, which are now becoming more well-known. And they're confused about, are they doing the right thing? Because there are people out there that say Yogananda didn't teach it right. And there are people out there that say Sri Yukteswar didn't teach it right. And there are people in other camps that say, well, these people don't do it right because they don't have all these techniques, or they don't do it right because they don't have this proper lineage. Which brings up the question, what is the real Kriya Yoga? And what we have to remember is that human nature plays a large part in many of the discrepancies and a lot of the confusion around a topic, especially spiritual topics. And why is that? Because as humans, we have belief systems, and we like our belief systems. They're comfortable. They allow us to feel like sometimes we're part of an elite few who only know a secret to enlightenment or a secret to spirituality. And in some ways, that can be helpful, because if you think you belong to something special, you're more likely to stick with the path. So we don't want to be judgmental for anyone, no matter how they look at Kriya Yoga or how they define it, as long as they're doing their work, as long as they are meditating, as long as they are doing their best to live their life as constructively as possible, as long as they are committed to realizing their own personal understanding of divine consciousness, then we really need to just let them be and let them do their own thing. But this does bring us to the point of, what is the real Kriya Yoga? And there are certain mechanics to the process that need to be there, no matter what lineage you belong to, or no matter who you claim your guru to be. And we also have to remember that Kriya Yoga, that's actually the name of the second chapter in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So really, anyone who reads the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and applies the principles, the philosophy within that work, is essentially practicing Kriya Yoga. Now, we have specific meditation techniques that Yogananda promoted, that other teachers promoted, and there are different variations on those techniques. For example, I learned from a student who learned directly from Yogananda. I have conversed with and been friends with people of other lineages, people who have been taught Kriya Yoga, those techniques, just a tad differently. And we get along fine. We understand each other just fine. But you have to remember that these differences in techniques, they are speaking to different people's temperaments. Okay. One of the things I always say about meditation and spirituality is that the more complicated it is, the less advanced it is. And why do I say that? Because so many people are seeking out advanced techniques. I want to know the advanced technique to know God immediately, to become immortal, to know perfect peace, these sorts of things. And the more you need, really the less advanced it is. And again, that's not a judgment, that's just a statement. In the same way that when you first learn to ride a bicycle, you might need training wheels so that you can stay steady and not break your neck in the process. So if you learn a meditation technique, or if you learn Kriya Yoga from a lineage or a path that requires you to go through many, many, many processes, well, maybe that's what you need. All right? And you work through that. And eventually, people of all lineages who practice using these mechanics that we're going to get into, these specific mechanics, they all come to the same realization, and that is that the techniques are methods to assist you to realize that which you want to know. And once you can do that, then you're able to sit quietly, be still, be present, fully awake and aware as divine consciousness, the absolute, God, however you want to look at it, whatever you want to call it, essentially. But then you don't need techniques to do it. In the same way that when a musician is first learning their instrument, and all musicians are learning the same music, right? If you play guitar or a saxophone or a tuba, you're still learning the same notes and the same scales. You just have a different instrument or a different temperament to work it out on. But when you're a musician and you're learning scales or you're learning a song, you might need to have that piece of paper right in front of you that tells you, put your fingers here, pluck this string, or bow it this way, or whatever it might be. And that's like the mechanics or the techniques of a meditation practice, or Kriya Yoga, we'll look at it that way. But once a musician knows those scales, and once a musician knows the song, he or she doesn't have to keep looking at it, it can just be played. So this is what happens as we progress through our spiritual practice, progress through our Kriya Yoga practice, is that as long as we are able to understand the principles, the principles of the techniques, then we can engage those. And if we need to chant mantras at each chakra as you pull the current up through your spine, fine. If all you need to do is practice Kriya Pranayama 3 times and you're in that state of peace and clarity, fine. You learn to work that out, okay? And it's going to be specific to you, which is one of the reasons, many people have criticism of Yogananda or other teachers who teach large numbers of people because they don't feel that you can give the specific guidance to each individual, and that's true. I agree with that. But what's the purpose of that? In order to begin practicing, you have to develop your own commitment, your own drive. And if you can develop that on your own by getting these basic procedures, then when it's time for you to work with a mentor or a teacher to really get into the fine points, to fine-tune it, you'll be prepared. And the teacher will know that you've had years of trying under your belt, so he or she knows that you're sincere in that regard. But we don't need to get into that because that can be a debate all of itself. So anyway, what are the mechanics to practice Kriya Yoga? Well, number 1, it's having a commitment to sitting still at least once or twice a day. A commitment to it, whether you like it or not. Number 2, it's learning to maintain and take care of one's body so that one can be healthy and fit and strong enough to endure sitting still for an hour or 2 hours at a time without the body getting in the way. Hence the reason Hatha Yoga is recommended. But I don't really care if it's Hatha Yoga as long as it's any form of exercise which makes your core strong and gives you the capacity to sit still. Next, it's learning to discipline the mind, to hold the mind steady. And that requires not only meditation techniques, but it requires that you become aware of the influences around you, the people that you spend time with, the entertainment that you indulge in, the time that you spend on the internet glued to things that don't really matter. Because these things kind of crowd up your mind in the same way that the more junk food you eat, the more unhealthy your digestive system becomes, and it's harder for you to be healthy. So disciplining the mind, disciplining your life so that you don't have all of this junk and confusion cluttering up the mind. That's the next step. Beyond that, it's becoming emotionally healthy. Emotionally healthy. When we're born into this world, we're typically raised by people who have been raised by other people who are unconscious or are doing their best, but they have their own little quirks and idiosyncrasies or traumas or things that they are working out based on their own life situation. And they raise you from that kind of viewpoint, which in turn conditions us. So we actually have to learn what is it going to take for us to be emotionally healthy, and what does an emotionally healthy person look like? Is it someone who smiles all the time, is full of bliss, never cries, never gets angry? No, that's not an emotionally healthy person. That is a repressed person. An emotionally healthy person is at peace with the fact that they have emotions. They're not trying to escape from pain. Now, they're not trying to put themselves in situations that cause pain, but they're not trying to deny the fact that pain exists in the world. Someone dies. You mourn, you grieve. You don't make up stories about how they went to heaven and God's going to take care of them. You need to honor and acknowledge the fact that you've experienced that loss. Move through it until you come out the other end, and you still wish it hadn't happened, whatever the difficulty or trauma might be. But you're at peace with it. You know, that's what happens in this world. It happens to everyone. That's part of God's play, whether we like it or not. And that can sound callous, but this idea of God or consciousness doesn't think like a human does, right? We always have to remember that. So it's learning to make peace with the fact that things are going to happen that make us angry. And being angry is fine. It's dwelling on the negative emotions that cause the issue, latching onto them, making them a part of our identification, our personality. That's when we have problems. So it's learning to move through. I'm in a place where there's nothing bad going on. I'm with my friends. I'm with my loved ones. It's joyous. I don't need to have anxiety. I'm at peace. I'm here in the present. Or something difficult happens and it causes me a lot of grief and sadness. I'm going to honor that and acknowledge it. I'm going to let that grief and sadness pass, work out naturally, and then move on with my life. This is how we develop emotional health. And it might require that you work with a counselor or work with a professional in this regard. It's why we have these people. So you can't usually do it all by yourself. And this is part of the Kriya Yoga process. Why is that? Because in order for you to really learn the subtleties of experiencing pure consciousness, to learn the subtleties of being internally peaceful no matter what happens, seeing everything and everyone as God, divine consciousness, you have to have this inner poise. And so part of the process isn't just forcing yourself to sit in meditation, isn't just forcing yourself to be a vegan or a vegetarian or whatever it might be, isn't just telling yourself you have to follow these strict rules. It's learning, how can I be a healthy human being? Because when you can do that, then it's much easier for you to sit quietly and understand the subtle processes of meditation. All right. Next, the idea of being kind to others, treating everyone as you might treat your ideal mother, right? You know, there is the idea that everyone is a reflection of us. And think about it this way, your ideal mother. Well, in an ideal world, your mother cares for you. Your mother loves you. Your mother will never leave you. This is in the ideal world. All right, this is an ideal. Now, your wife or your husband might leave you and not think highly of you. Your siblings and friends, they'll come and they'll go. All these other people in the world, they'll come and they'll go. But ideally, the mother is there to support you, to love you, no matter what you do, and to protect you. All right. And so if everyone is a reflection of us, and we're just going to take this theoretically, is it true, is it not true? I don't know. It seems to be the case, but all these things can be challenged scientifically, and I'm not really interested in that. I'm just going on personal experience here. But if everyone is a reflection of you, and you start treating everyone with the love that you would treat your ideal mother and how she would treat you, well, then what happens there? You create this dynamic of love and acceptance that is not based on sexuality. It's not based on getting anything from anyone. It's just simply based on that capacity to love someone unconditionally and to accept that you too can be loved unconditionally. All right. Now we have to remember, in that kind of relationship, the ideal mother might not approve of what you're doing. So in the same way that you might be around different people and you can still love them, but they can still be doing things that you don't necessarily want to be involved in. So you can love them from a distance. But it's learning to generate this sense of love and compassion. And it doesn't mean that you have to dramatize it. You just know it internally, because this whole process is really an internal thing, right? You don't need to draw attention to yourself because of it. Otherwise, what happens? You become pretentious. You become an actor. You become one of those people that acts all holy and sattvic, but deep down inside, they're really just a mess of overcompensations, and they just want to look a certain way. We don't want you to be that way. We want you to be a real, authentic human being, perfectly in tune with all that is around you, life itself, to know what you are, right? And that has nothing to do with pretentiousness. That has nothing to do with putting on an orange robe and acting a certain way. That has nothing to do with smiling all the time. That has nothing to do with, saying all the right things about, oh, bless you, dear, and all that kind of stuff. It's about being who you are as a direct expression of this divine consciousness. All right, that's the key, while maintaining harmony in regards to all the things that we've just discussed. So these are things that are necessary for Kriya Yoga. To a degree, they're explained in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This one book here, there it is. There we go. Kriya Yoga, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment. That's my personal commentary on the Yoga Sutras. At AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, there's also a 26-hour course, audio course, available for download, specifically going over the Yoga Sutras in relationship to Kriya Yoga. Also at AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, under the Learn Kriya Yoga tab, there's an 11-hour Kriya Yoga training course for download. On this YouTube channel, there's a free playlist. If you go to the playlists on this YouTube channel and go to the Learn Kriya Yoga playlist, it'll tell you all the techniques that you need, mostly. There are a few more complicated ones, but the techniques that you would learn freely on this channel, I used those techniques for the first 10 years of practicing Kriya Yoga, and they worked beautifully. I rarely even use the other techniques. In fact, the more I've gotten into the process, the less techniques I actually use. So it's a balance there. On one hand, techniques are very good, but on the other hand, you don't want to become dependent on them. But everyone needs what they need. So if you need more techniques, by all means, get them. Learn from a teacher who's really going to drill them into your head and give you all kinds of stuff to do, so that you're standing on your head and trying to balance a cup on your toe and circulating pranayama through your spine as you chant through the chakras and visualize all these things. That's an exaggeration. They don't really do that, at least none that I've met. But anyway, let's move on here. So a few more things I want to cover about the meditation aspect of things. And bear in mind, remember, all the things we just covered, focus on those first. Those are most important if you really want to do this well. But now, the actual meditation aspect of things. Well, first of all, when you sit to meditate, you have to commit to the practice. You have to do your best, figure out for you, what is it going to take for me to be able to sit down and quit thinking about my email? To sit down and quit thinking about what my husband said to me 3 weeks ago? To sit down and quit worrying about work or thinking about work? What do I need to do to withdraw my attention so that for this 30 minutes or an hour, I'm not even going to bother with that? Okay? This is part of renunciation. When you're in the world, you need to focus on what is important. And when you're saying to meditate, what is important is internalizing your attention. Now, the Kriya pranayama techniques that you learn, any Kriya meditation technique that you learn, those help to internalize and insulate you. So they're helpful in that way. But most people will realize that they'll do those things and they'll have great results, but there'll still be these kind of vestigial issues coming up. And that's where you personally need to ask yourself, what do I need to do to really stop thinking about this? And it might take a force of will to say, look, I'm not thinking about that right now. Get out. And you might have to keep doing that until your mind becomes strong, that you can just turn it off and stop thinking about these things. And you, again, have to figure out how you are going to do that. All right? Everyone has a different approach to this, and this is why this is a very personal path. Any spiritual path is an extremely personal path. Anyone who tells you otherwise or tries to make it into a cookie-cutter approach, they don't know what they're talking about. All right? So you have to remember that. Any teachers that you learn from, they can help guide you based on what their experiences are, but at the end of the day, you still have to figure out how it's going to work for you, which is one of those reasons why I'm not a big fan of following teachers. People talk to me all the time, well, when you find the right guru, blah, blah, blah. That's all just entertainment, and that's just giving up your responsibility to someone else. And that might get you through this lifetime or a few lifetimes, but eventually you're going to wake up and you're going to realize, wait a minute, I can't be dependent on someone external to me for this to occur. So how can I work it out internally? It's perfectly fine to have a teacher or mentor to be a role model for you. It's perfectly fine to have someone to say, this is how I did it, maybe you should try this. But at the end of the day, you still have to figure out how it's done. Whether you're learning a musical instrument, whether you're learning to play, a violin, or whether you're learning to cook, whether you're learning to do karate, whether you're learning to do anything, they can give you insights and tips, but you still have to try and make the mistakes until you're like, oh, okay, I see how this works. So don't give up your personal responsibility. And in my mind, in my experience, no real guru will expect you to dedicate yourself to them. It should be the other way around. The guru should dedicate himself or herself to you. And this is one of the reasons why what I've experienced is just my personal experience here. Authentic spiritual teachers will not readily accept students because they have to be sure that they have the capacity to help, and they have to be sure that they have the capacity to commit to this person's clarity. Not to take over for them, but to commit to training them until they get it. So anyone who just accepts anyone, they're wanting to accept something else other than just your devotion. So just keep that in mind. So you need to be very cautious in this regard. But anyway, back to the point. You have to figure out how to push those things away. In the book A Course in Tranquility, this other book I've got here, there we are. This is a very practical book on spirituality and how to organize your life. And one of the things I talk about in that book is one of the ways you can stop thinking about things when you're meditating or when you're trying to meditate is to have a pen and paper beside you. And anytime something comes up, what do? You say, all right, I need to remember this, so you just write it down. Then you can get back to meditating without thinking about it. And just imagine how wonderful that would be. Why do people get so disturbed in meditation? Because what do? They think they have to remember these things for later. So if you just write them down, you don't have to remember them for later. They're already there. And in time, it'll be done. You won't have to think about anything. And this is part of the process of meditation that you will learn, that you are not failing as thoughts are coming up. That's just part of your body or your energetic body detoxing itself. So one of the most important things you can do is just simply sit still and watch your mind. Just do that. All kinds of crazy stuff is going to come up. Thinking about people you haven't thought about in years. But if you give it a chance, and you do that for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a year, eventually what occurs is that the mind has emptied itself out. And then you may still think about things that have happened over the next week or so, but you're not thinking about 20, 30, 40 years of stuff. So part of meditation's initial process is purging that. And all it requires is that you watch. You acknowledge it and you watch while remaining as the witness. And again, there are plenty of videos on this channel where I go over these kinds of things, but this is how you first start with meditation. And then eventually, once you get the handle of it, once you get mastery of meditation, whether it's chanting through the chakras or circulating life force through the spine, you want to move on to contemplation, where you contemplate that which you want to know. Do you want to know what God is, really what God is? Not what your concepts are, not all what the books tell you, but what is it really? Are you able to accept that if it's going to come to you? Because that's the important point. We have all these concepts about what God is. And that's one of the reasons most people don't make a lot of progress with Kriya Yoga or aren't practicing the real Kriya Yoga. Remember, this is all relative. Because they think God, Goddess, divine consciousness is supposed to show up in a certain way, when really the process is supposed to be getting rid of all of your preconceptions so that you can see what it really is. And you have to ask yourself, are you willing to admit that God, divine consciousness, your ideas of spirituality may not have anything to do with what you've been told? If you can, and you're just really curious, you want to know, that's driving you, you're going to make good progress. Because you're going to be able to sit still, sit quietly, follow the directions that you have learned for meditation, and to contemplate, well, what am I? What really is God? And the quieter you can become over time, it takes a while, years, then eventually you start to get insights. Wow, that's what I am. Nothing at all like I thought. And it won't come in words. It comes in a flash of insight. And then you go deeper into it and further, right? So part of the process of Kriya Yoga isn't, again, pledging yourself to a human. It isn't finding every concept of spirituality you have is accurate. It's figuring out what's real. It isn't doing all kinds of complicated mental gymnastics, although that might be required in the beginning. That's perfectly fine. It's learning to have a conversation with this divine consciousness, which is you, to figure out what are you really beyond name, form, circumstance, so that you can live as this expression of divine consciousness in the world while playing your role, whatever that may be, whatever your career is, whatever your personality is. We're not judging you because we need everyone for everything in this world, otherwise the world wouldn't function. And then internally, silently, quietly, playing your part. Knowing what you are silently. And that's the final aspect I'd like to share today. The idea that this is a quiet path. This is not a path where you go and talk to all your friends about how wonderful this experience you had was, or isn't Autobiography of Yogi so, fulfilling, whatever, I don't know. It's figuring out, how do I sit quietly by myself, figuring out my connection to this divine consciousness, and living the best life I can, performing my duties, seeing God, divine consciousness in everyone, making peace with the fact that I'm going to die, learning to live as a real human being while knowing that you are a manifestation, a unique expression of this holistic consciousness. So it's learning to be that unique expression while also realizing, knowing that you are everything as well. All right, and we're getting a little mystical there, but that's essentially what happens. And no one knows. No one walks around and looks at you and says, oh, look, you have a halo around your head. No one looks at you and says, you must be very holy. They just think you're a normal person walking down the street. They won't even recognize you. All right? If someone requires that you give them comfort, you just give them comfort, not because you're a spiritual person, but because that's what's right. And all the while, internally, you have this silent relationship with divine consciousness. You know what it is. It knows what you are. It always knows what you are. But you start to realize the connection that's always been there. And you live your life, as they say in Vasista's Yoga, you learn to live a natural life contentedly. And then in the evenings, you can meditate deeply and commune with the Absolute, or however you conceive of it. In the mornings, you wake up, you can do the same thing. And throughout the day, every action that you take is just that divine consciousness working through you. So you lose this small sense of self. But no one knows about it. It's not a dramatic thing. So I work with very few people. I can probably count on my hand the number of students I've been able to work with that follow this. And then they don't, I make sure to be clear that, you're not going to tell people you're a Kriya Yogi. You're not going to make it a big deal. It's all personal for you. You're going to live your life. No one's going to know. You're going to be a good person. You're going to be a loving person. And sometimes you'll get angry. Sometimes you'll get sad. But this is a very private thing. And the more private you make it, the better it works. Because in a sense, you are insulating the whole process to not get... to not invite the opinions of others, to not get energetically enmeshed in other people's ideas, because that's what happens when you have relationships with people. That's why many traditions say, don't talk about these things, because you need to follow your own personal path. And anytime you talk about it, you invite other people's opinions, which creates more confusion, which prevents you from moving forward. Now, that's not to say that you don't ask questions. That's not to say that you don't learn from other people. It's that kind of situation that you want to avoid, where it's about kind of like proving something to each other, right? In spirituality, you're not going to be able to prove that objectively. It's not going to happen. I don't care what you say. If someone has spiritual powers and they can levitate, or they can see your future, or they can heal you, that has absolutely no bearing on whether someone is spiritual or awake or not. That's just a power. In the same way that you can't really judge a person based on their personality or how you think, they should be. That's not a good thing either. So the whole process comes down to, are you inspired to follow a particular path? If you are, follow it. Don't ask questions about other people. Stick to it. When I first started studying Kriya Yoga, I knew immediately that this was the path to follow. And it's evolved over the years as I've practiced. But I've never had to ask anyone else about it. I never doubted it. I just followed it, right? And then it works. In the same way with other aspects of life. If you're always, if you want to learn to play blues music and you're going to ask a jazz guitarist, or you're going to ask a flamenco guitarist, or you're going to go ask, I don't know, hip hop artist how to play blues music, you're not going to get it. They're going to say, oh, but these are the strengths of my kind of music. You should come play it. But no, you want to play the blues. So you need to stick with people who are going to teach you how to play the blues. If you want to be eclectic, no problem. But you're not going to master the blues that way, or jazz or anything else. So that's why one-pointedness, devotion, is so important. It's not devotion to an individual. It's not devotion to a fantasy. It's devotion to the process and learning as you go and remaining alert and awake as you go. So it's like you're having a conversation. You're actually involved in it. You're not just saying, I want to put myself into a trance where I can quit worrying about everything and then everything takes care of itself. The whole process is learning to ride the wave of consciousness, which you are. And so that's why the difficulty that often arises with this is, there's the idea of surrender, but there's also the idea of willpower. Well, we have both in the world. So the trick is learning, well, when is it appropriate to surrender? Things I cannot change. That's just divine consciousness working itself out no matter what I do. And when is it appropriate to take action, which is divine will coming through and saying, oh, look, we can make a change here. And that's part of the issue. Is it's like you're having a real conversation in real time where you're figuring out as you go. You're dancing as you go. It's like being an improv artist. You don't really know what's coming up next, but you have the skills that you can make it a piece of art. And that's the way your life is meant to be. And that art rides between the two processes of surrender and willpower. You surrender when you're part of a flow of consciousness that just cannot be stopped. It's just going to happen anyway. And that there's many things in life in which that occurs. You can't do anything, so there's no point in fighting it. On the other hand, something occurs and the inspiration arises in your mind. I can change. I can make a change here. I can do something about this. And then you do your best. Whether you fail or not, well, that's a whole other story, but you try. And so you have to remember divine consciousness works through in many different ways. It works through in the way that sometimes you have to surrender. Sometimes it requires you personally to take action because you're part of the change that needs to occur, right? So that's the trick of all this. And this is the real Kriya Yoga, is learning to live your life in this way. The meditation techniques, all the hoopla, that's around the whole process, those are foundational supports to help strengthen your mind, stabilize your consciousness, so that you can learn to live your life as Kriya Yoga. I was recently going to go to a seminar. I'm probably still going to go because it seems interesting to me. But one of the things that was asked was, what are your spiritual practices? And I had a hard time answering that. In fact, I haven't answered it yet. I still have to sign up for it, because I thought, well, I could tell them that I do these certain techniques every day or that I read these books, but it doesn't seem accurate, because even right now, doing this video with you, this is part of my spiritual practice. When I do my work as a Vedic astrologer, that's part of my spiritual practice. When I go exercise, go walk on the trails with a 20-pound pack on my back, that's part of my spiritual practice. I think of it that way. When I make food for someone, same thing. When I play music, same thing. When I go to sleep, even then, before I go to bed, I have this idea that in this state, I'm still communing with this divine consciousness, realizing it. So it's a consistent thing. So how do you tell someone, what is your spiritual practice? When everything you do, you intend to be part of the process. So that, in my mind, is real Kriya Yoga. And you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to do things that people aren't going to approve of. You're going to make someone angry. You're going to fail at many things. But it's learning from it, right? That's the issue, learning from it. So letting go of all kinds of judgment, as long as you're doing your best and learning from it, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Just do your best. Learn from your mistakes. Interact with people as appropriately as possible. Do your work as honestly as possible. Figure out who you are. Move forward. Meditate daily. Take care of yourself. These are the ideals. So in my mind, this is the essence of what I think my experience tells me real Kriya Yoga is. So I'd like to encourage you to think about things in this way. And realize you may not agree with a lot of things that I've said, but if there's something in there that's helpful for you, fine. The job has been done. So be well, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season with whoever you happen to be spending it with. Keep your spiritual practices strong, dedicated. Do your best to live appropriately in the world. Take care of your body. Be kind to others. At least once a day, give someone a compliment. If you see someone in pain, do your best to help them if you can, because remember, you can't help everybody. But always remember, every experience you have, every one you see, whether you like them or not, whether you like the experience or not, ask yourself, how can I understand that this is also divine consciousness? How can I experience that directly? And the more you're able to do that, the more peaceful you'll become, the more self-knowledgeable, self-realized you will become. And all your questions will fall away. You won't have any questions anymore. You'll just live your life, surrendered when you're supposed to, using your willpower at other times. Okay, so be well again, and we'll be in touch.